When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. I knew I was recording. I thought, how do I fill the gap between pushing the button and sitting here? I thought with the title of this video, Let It Be. Actually, more specifically, Fame and Blame, which comes from two parts of the 4 pairs making up the 8 worldly winds. So let it be. A lyric from a song. When I find myself excuse me, in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And very wise words they are too. But where do they come from? The Beatles? Mary, the Virgin, Mother of Jesus Christ? Or the Buddha? Well, the Buddha came some 500 years before Mary, and Mary some nearly 2,000 years before the Beatles. But probably even before the Buddha's time, there were great sages of wisdom who knew that one can take all kinds of trouble and allow it just to be, and therefore be less affected by it. So, Viruna, have I said that name correctly? I think so. Vinura, not Viruna, Vinura asked me if I could make a video addressing how to take criticism well from people and not retaliate. He then goes on to say, we spend hours and hours thinking about people who come across us insulting and doing us wrong, never really being able to get over it. If you can address this, it will help everyone. Well, thank you for your comment, Vinura, and your question. I really hope everyone doesn't have this this problem. Whether you are coming across people in everyday life whom seemingly are of opposing opinion or simply insulting you or not, I would like to think that we don't all dwell on it, but we can address this very easily, because the Buddha, long before the time of Mary and Jesus Christ and long before the Beatles, addressed this very subject with his talk on these 8 worldly winds, the 4 pairs. And part of these 4 pairs is, if I say how they are structured, the first pair, gain and loss. Okay, and then fame and infamy, followed by praise and blame, and lastly pleasure and pain. So 4 pairs of opposite feelings / stroke emotions that we have all experienced or are experiencing. And the common denominator amongst all 4 is that if you take the positive side of, say, gain and loss, then fame and infamy, praise and blame, pleasure and pain, the positive side are aspects of emotion or feelings we want to have. If we don't have them, there is an inherent desire to have them. This in itself is also suffering, as is, of course, what we more commonly experience or would label as suffering as the desire not to have their contrary opposite of, for instance, loss in the case of gain, infamy in the case of fame, blame in the case of praise, and of course pain in the case of pleasure. They're negative opposites. But similarly, our desire not to have those negative opposites is suffering. So by that very understanding you can see whether it is fame you have or infamy, which is not quite anonymity, because anonymity might be something that one would consider a positive thing. Infamy is more, you're kind of famous but not for the good things you'd like to be famous for. And that is very much a subjective view. If we understand that as the first underlying nature of these four pairs, making these 8 worldly effects, which get called and described as winds, because they have the effect of blowing you around, moving you around. Whether it's really physically, not so, but emotionally, mentally. You know, as I've said many times before, this practice is about developing wholesome mind states and reducing unwholesome mind states. And the way we do that is through developing wisdom, knowing these things that I'm talking about, which help us to be less affected by this turbulence, the vicissitudes of life, which we all experience. As Varuna puts it, many of us experience and then worry about it, think about it, dwell on it, and suffer even more so. Basically like being pierced with an arrow, and rather than accepting the pain and thinking, okay, that is the pain of being pierced with an arrow. This pain after some time will go away, or I will get used to it. No, what we do, we grab the arrow by the shank and we wiggle it around to cause more pain. And this is what we're doing often with, say, criticism. Now, I've mispaired them because of Varuna's question in terms of how do we deal with this? How can we overcome this if it is a problem in our lives? I've paired fame with blame, because infamy is a rather insipid, wishy-washy subject matter, really. Most people these days who are having a problem, and actually no, that is wrong. I say these days because it can get highlighted in the media, so I understand that you know, this social media world that exists these days, which I don't really consider this format, YouTube, as part of that. If I did, I probably wouldn't use it so much or use it at all, because I don't use any other form of social media. It isn't, I don't think, conducive to wholesome mind states at all. It can be useful for certain aspects of life, but not really. I think one could send an ordinary text or an email or phone somebody up, and an email or a text could be sent to a group. I don't think it really needs to be liked, or there need to be numbers of people viewing it, if you get my meaning. That is the irrelevant side. That is reinforcing this praise and blame, fame and infamy part of life, which is never a good thing. So I've paired fame with blame Because what would often happen in this world of, let's say, social media, in this day and age, would be that someone would become famous through whatever it is they've done, and let's take examples. I can really only relate back to television times, but we can take very famous people, large, I don't really want to name people. Anyway, celebrities, that's a good word, celebrities, whom are very famous, seemingly leading wholesome lives, very charitable, altruistic, and then in some few years later are suddenly locked away in a jail somewhere for some heinous crime, and one wouldn't even consider mentioning their name ever again, let alone in the public eye. This is how those two opposites can work. This is how fickle and fragile that situation can be. But not to put importance on that, but to try and redirect the importance to how we deal about our feelings, we can go back to the time of the Buddha, 2,566 years ago, when he still then was talking about fame and infamy. So it isn't a new thing. We can't blame social media. We can't blame the modern world. It has been probably long before the Buddha's time a problem in society. We get famous, we get praise, and we build self-adoration up in ourselves. We feel good, we feel elated, we're put on a pedestal. But then, of course, when that pedestal is knocked away, then it's more of a problem. The Buddha reminded us with all of these four worldly winds, four pairs, that they are too subject to the faculties of existence that I've also spoken about often, of anicca, impermanence, dukkha, suffering, and anatta, not being within our control. And primarily in this case, anicca, impermanence. If you have a pain that you don't want, this is suffering. But it isn't permanent. Even if the pain is seemingly permanent because you have it for your lifetime, of course it is only as permanent as your lifetime. But you will in fact also within that lifetime get used to it, and it will no longer be so much of a burden. Or it could be simply something like a headache, which is a terrible thing to have, but when it's gone, it's gone. Now if we see each and everything that arises, whether it's a physical or emotional feeling, as impermanent, it takes the edge off it. It takes a lot of the suffering away. Because we know it will come, it will go. Going as easily as it arrived. And this is wisdom. This is what we develop. This is how we understand. If someone criticizes us, whether rightly or whether wrongly, one should always firstly listen and also consider it gratefully that they have taken the time to pick up on something you have done, an action, which is karma. This is the meaning of karma, an action of body, speech or mind. It can only be one of those things, or all of those things. They have picked up upon, and they have taken it upon themselves to judge you on whether that is something good or bad that you have done, said, or behaved, thought. then you consider, is their judgment, their criticism accurate? Now this isn't with a view to returning by way of argument and therefore judgment from yourself towards them, but for your own benefit and understanding. And that is as far as it goes. Now, we practice Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Panya, wisdom; Samadhi, meditation; Sila, moral virtue, in reverse order. The reason I say them in reverse order is because we're talking about wisdom here, and what makes up wisdom, or what is a part of all of the many aspects that can make up wisdom, is what we're talking about today. But the foundations towards establishing wisdom, a firm rooted understanding, and therefore protection from these emotional worldly winds, is Sila, moral virtue. Now, of course, monks are lucky. We have 227 rules. So, I kind of forgot to mention the other day, I went off subject, but when I arrived here in this monastery, I didn't speak Thai. I still don't, and they don't speak English. But I know the monastic code. So I hope, and I can to some extent assume, that I haven't done anything wrong or said anything wrong, because I'm still here, and they would have soon asked me to leave if that hadn't been the case. But that isn't my doing. It is because I have the benefit of all of those many rules. I know from the Vinaya exactly how I am supposed to behave in all the different circumstances that arise on a daily basis here in this monastery, as it would in a monastery in India or in England or anywhere in the world of this tradition, of Buddhism in general, in fact. These rules are commonplace. There are differences between monasteries in their bylaws, the core what, but generally speaking, in terms of Sila, if we keep Sila, then we cannot go wrong, which is how I am still here, without having to, or being able to read their rules or understand the language. It's evident to me from my understanding of the Vinaya already. But as lay people, we have just 5 rules of no killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or taking of intoxicants. And that is enough. You can even make it simpler than that and say doing no harm, either to yourself or to other beings. Now, if you have that assurance in place, like when I came to stay here, I didn't know how long I'd be able to stay, but now I'm still here, and I have the assurance that by keeping the Vinaya, I'm welcome. If you have that same assurance of having done no harm to yourself or to other beings, and with the full intention of continuing to do no harm to yourself or other beings, then you too have that assurance that any criticism that is levied upon you, any judgment that is put to you, is most likely incorrect, unfounded, wrong. Even if it is a matter of subjective opinion, it is less important, not worth considering. Now, you can receive absolute blatant insults, of course, and the Buddha talked of this on many occasions in many suttas. One such example was that someone was being blatantly abused and asked of what to do. Or no, the Buddha was being blatantly abused and he was being asked, how do you put up with that? How do you deal with that? Why are you not upset? And his answer was, well, do you have guests in your house? And they said yes. Do you offer them something to eat when they arrive? And they said yes. He said, well, if I came to your house, would you offer me something to eat? And they said yes. He said, well, like you offering me something to eat, or someone offering me an insult, I have the freedom and the choice not to accept what you're offering me. And you too, when someone is berating you, insulting you, being just nasty, you have the choice not to accept that. But with the underlying assurance of having kept sila, you will almost certainly be able to know that you can just not be uncaring, but not get involved in counter-argument. Turn the other cheek, walk away, or even just politely say, I respect your opinion. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. That very often puts people back in a comfort zone. You don't have to say, yes, you're right, or no, you're wrong. I appreciate your opinion. Thank you very much. Now, back to the title. Mother Mary came to me speaking words of wisdom. Now she, Mother Mary, the Virgin Mary, whether she said anything of this sort, I don't know, I'm not sure. But it doesn't matter. Historical detail is unimportant. The image, again, which is not necessarily accurate, but the image we perceive, or perhaps mainly Christians and Catholics would perceive, of the Virgin Mary is one of peace and pure equanimity, unmoved. She had a very difficult life, a very difficult life from a young age until the details which you know of the way she lost her son. But throughout it all, seemingly, as we're led to understand, but more from the point of view of giving us a good example to live by, she seemed to some extent relatively unmoved. Now, this is not because she didn't care, but she knew this was the way it would be. So she didn't try to wiggle the arrow. Of course, she suffered the pain, but she was able, with equanimity, to bear with it. And that is the middle part of this Sila Samadhi Panya, meditation. Through sitting in meditation, we are helping to establish patience and forbearance, this ability to bear with equanimity all that is going on, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, pleasure or pain, knowing of its impermanence and knowing that it is all suffering. Whether it is pleasure, it is suffering because when we are not having it we have desire for it, but also it is suffering because once we have pleasure it is going to end, which is suffering. Or pain, which similarly we have suffering as a result of not wanting pain. And with fame, the same, and blame, the same. And we can look at all of these four pairs, or these 8 worldly winds, the same. But with this foundation of equanimity from meditation, and the foundation of sila, or moral virtue, doing no harm, we can be wise. Sila and meditation, samadhi, moral virtue and meditation, are the foundations to panya, wisdom. And part of the factors of enlightenment, or one of them, included in the factors of enlightenment, is equanimity. So it is therefore, as is wisdom, but it is therefore part of wisdom Now, if we go back to the analogy of my rice plant and my mango tree, if you have a fast-growing rice plant during the rainy season and it's got quite shallow roots and the winds come along, it could be blown around and it could be uprooted quite easily. But it did grow quickly and it would bear its fruit, its grain, the rice, quickly. Whereas the more longer established mango tree has got deep roots, takes many years to grow, and then further years to bear fruit, is established with those foundations like ourselves, so that when these worldly winds come along, it may move, but it won't be uprooted. It can survive the worldly winds. So you, me, us, with our practice of sila and samadhi, are establishing this wisdom, this equanimity, which is firmly rooted. And as these vicissitudes of life come along, buffet us around maybe, but they don't turn us over. We're not uprooted. It isn't that we don't care about opinion, but we can give it consideration without involvement, without retaliation. And I think you asked in your question, Varuna, you said not retaliate, and that is very good. You already have that understanding that you should not retaliate, because that is wiggling the arrow. And also, it is breaking your sila by probably throwing back some wrong speech, harsh words in response, which may not be entirely your fault, provoked, but unthought out. This is how we deal with criticism. This is how we understand those feelings. Being firmly established in moral virtue, practicing meditation and developing this wisdom. Now, of course, the Beatles came along with this beautiful song and beautiful lyric, and many of these songs we hear of today, which are so very famous, are so because of these very wise and wonderful words. And you can ask yourself, is the song famous because of the song or because of who sung it? Are the people who sung it famous because of them singing it or because of the song? And you can see it is always a combination of the two. It is a mutual, it's an amalgamation of wisdom and performance, which is kind of the opposite of taking criticism and reacting. But the underlying aspect of it all is it is all based on these fundamental faculties of existence. That even such famous artists, famous bands as the Beatles, Elvis Presley, who sang a song called Fame and Fortune, how misgiving it can be, was the lyric. They come and they go. Of course, some last for a long, long time. But there were surely very many famous artists back in the 20th century, early 20th century, 19th century, 18th century, 17th, 16th, 15th, 14th, whom were so famous. To date, we have classical composers that are still understood and heard of today, and very well respected. But even before them would have been people of fame and notoriety whom are no longer known of or heard of. And even this worldly existence, this universe, this cosmos, is in itself impermanent. So that understanding is the firm foundation and wisdom that we've learned from the Buddha's teachings, not in theory, but experientially. And the way always to see all of these, to put these ideas to the test, is by living this life of moral virtue, meditation, and developing the mind. And this way, you will have no problem whether you are famous and liked all over the world, or you're getting the blame for everything that goes wrong wherever you happen to be living or working at the moment. It won't be forever. Just carry on doing good, causing no harm. And sooner or later, this attribute will be recognized in you. And then your fame, or let's say even infamy, will last for much longer. Like this figure of the Virgin Mary, whom perform no specific miracles or activities in comparison to the Son, Jesus Christ, but is held in such high esteem throughout the world because of her equanimity and her harmony with nature. And this is an attribute to be developed and one of the factors of enlightenment. So, I think if that explains, I hope, I've got a little copy of the question here. Yeah, so thank you, Varuna, for that comment. It reminded me of the 8 worldly winds, and I thought it is useful to talk about. I hope you find it useful. If not, you can ignore it, and I won't mind. I've come inside today. I think you can't hear them now, but at this time of the year, if you're familiar with cicadas, they make, they've just started up again. We're coming into the warm season towards the hot season, and the cicadas make a noise in the jungles here like, at the moment, a dentist's drill. Zzz. And if I was sitting on the veranda out there, I thought anyone coming in to this video a little bit of the way through, as can happen, will think, no, that annoying sound in the background, his mic's broken again. They wouldn't watch it. But these, you'll get used to it, because these cicadas, as we go through the year towards the monsoon season, I think this is the way it works from my experience anyway, is that sound develops into a more like a full-blown chainsaw. It's very noisy. So I'm trying out a different situation by coming inside today for a little bit of protection around the background noises. I apologize for the singing at the beginning of the video, and I seek forgiveness of all whom will be judging me and pointing out the fact that I've broken a precept by singing. I wasn't dancing, but it was more to make a point. And after all, what is chanting? Okay, there are limits to the notes in chanting, although that can get quite melodious in some places and very monotone in others. I'm in a place where it's very monotone, so singing is perhaps not something I should be doing, but I understand and I know that. But it was to get the point across with regards to the fame of such a lyric, such a song, and how it can be applied, even though that's some years old and the subject matter is thousands of years old. It is still as applicable today in this modern world of social media as it even was before that in the time of the Buddha. And there's yet another example of anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, suffering, and that nothing is within our control or our self. So I will leave it there, and thank you for watching or listening, and I will speak to you again very soon.